Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the live Q&A with me, Professor Michael Scott, on today, the Thursday, the 18th of October. Yes, indeed. It's a great pleasure to be with you again this Thursday, and we've got some great questions in from you all, which I'm hoping to get through at least some of. As always, if we don't get through your questions today, then they will be going on the list, hopefully to be answered in future weeks as well. So, without any further ado, let's get started with this great question from Alison Henry. That's come in since last week. I was surprised. Hi, Julie. Hi, Dan. How are you doing? Kind of welcome to live Q&A. Alison Henry's question. I was surprised recently when I read about a full-size replica of the Parthenon in Nashville, Tennessee, complete with a full-scale gilded and painted statue of Athena. Have I been there? Have you? And what do I think of it? Well, that's a great question from Alison Henry. And I'm so glad that you got a chance to read about the Parthenon in Nashville, and I hope you get a chance to go and see it. I haven't actually been there to see it myself. It's one of the things I would love to do the next time I'm in the States. Hi, Charlotte. You're not on the school run and you can watch. Great that you can join us for this Q&A with me, Michael Scott. The full-size exact replica of the Parthenon sitting in Nashville, Tennessee is quite a kind of weird conception, isn't it? And it's been used as great film sets. So Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief filmed inside that Parthenon. It's a little bit in a bit better kind of full state of repair than the original, and obviously a little bit less delicate. It actually dates back in origin to about the 1897, when Nashville was the center of Tennessee's Centennial Exposition. And Nashville has as its moniker, its sort of tagline name is Athens of the South. And so when they were deciding kind of what to center this entire Centennial exposition all around, they thought, what better than the building that was the pinnacle of Athenian architecture, the Parthenon. So they decided in 1897 to build a replica, an exact replica of the Parthenon that sits at the center of the big Centennial Park, and you can still see both the park and the Parthenon there today. Although today it's in concrete. When it was originally built in the 1890s, it was actually built in sort of perishable materials, wood, etc., because they didn't really expect it to last beyond the exposition. But it was so popular and so many people were coming to see it that they kept it up. And then when they needed to start repairing it and it was starting to fall into a bit of disrepair, they took the decision in the 1920s and 30s to rebuild it again in concrete. Hi, Alexandra. Great that you can join us. Sarah, hello. Your Catherine's just started philosophy at Warwick. I hope she's having a great first couple of weeks. It's been a busy first couple of weeks of term. This week with my students, we've been looking at texts like the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, which is a 1st century AD text talking about Roman traders trading around the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean through to the ports of India and what they could find in all the different ports. We've been discussing the burials of Tilia Tepe in modern-day Afghanistan that were in the ancient regions of Greco-Bactria and the Kushan Empire, and looking at the Begram Horde and looking at some of the extraordinarily rich cultural material that comes out of this meeting point of great ancient cultures from East and West. And with my first-year Greek Culture and Society students, we've been looking at the panoply, the menu of different kind of forms of political community that you could have within the ancient Greek world. So it's been a busy week for us in Warwick, and we've got another open day on this Saturday, on Saturday the 20th. So if you are thinking about studying classics and you'd like to come and meet the department and come and see us, do come and see us this Saturday. You can register for an open day on the departmental website, which is www.warwick.ac.uk/classics. So yes, we were talking about the full-size replica of the Parthenon in Nashville, Tennessee, that was constructed back in 1897 and then was rebuilt in concrete in the 1920s and 30s. And then in the 1990, it had the statue of Athena Parthenos that we know stood inside the Parthenon, which we have fantastic descriptions of, as well as inscribed accounts about. A full-size replica of that was sculpted and put in as well. So you can, get something of a sense of what it must have been like to stand inside the Parthenon and gaze on this extraordinarily powerful statue of the goddess Athena, the patron deity of the city, looking down on you. So it's on top of my list to go to next time I'm in that part of the States, and I hope it is for you guys too. So we had another question which kind of links into this, which was from Christopher Thomas Walker. And his question was this: that given that most democratic countries employ a republican system rather than Athenian-style direct democracy, what is the real importance or significance of Athenian-style democracy today? Which is a really great and important question. And he's absolutely right, Christopher's absolutely right, that most countries do not have anything like the Athenian direct style democracy, where every citizen is discussing, debating and voting on every issue in that kind of very direct way. We have indirect democracies where we elect representatives for a certain period of time to do that debating and deciding on our behalfs, or we have more republican style democracies with checks and balances and multiple different institutions and organizations, and the most obvious of which is the United States. Hello Helen, how are you doing? You got to Athens lucky this year, so you saw the original Parthenon in process of being restored, as it is has been over the last 20 years or so. Hello Anthony, nice to see you, thank you so much for joining. Welcome to this live Q&A with me, Professor Michael Scott. And we've got a question we're discussing from Christopher Walker about why is it that no modern governments seem to follow Athenian direct style democracy, and why are they much more a republican system and thus emulating much more the Roman republican system. Now the Roman Republic and the democracy of Athens, so it's told in the ancient sources, were actually kind of brought into being almost in the same year, at the same moment. But the Roman Republic has become much more of a popular model for modern constitutions to follow, and in the US this is absolutely the case. We have in the US, we have the Senate and Capitol Hill kind of directly taking terminology from the Roman model, not the Greek. And if you date back to the discussions and debates surrounding the formation of the Constitution of the United States, and you can read about them in quite some detail in the Federalist Papers that were published by some of the founding fathers, it is phenomenal quite how many different ancient constitutions they were actually bringing to bear in their discussions about what their own American Constitution should look like. And the big contenders were Rome, Athens, Sparta, Crete, and a number of others. But it was clear that they did not want the Athenian model. The Athenian model for them was very much an idea of mass rule by an unruly mob. This was not going to be a careful, wise, decisive, judicious government if they went down the Athenian model. And as a result, they very much decided to pump for the Roman model. Now, partly that's to do with the Romans themselves having done an awfully good job of recasting Athenian direct democracy as mob rule. The Romans didn't like the idea of Athenian direct democracy at all, and very much kind of through the Roman lens, Athenian democracy was kind of chastised as being little more than mob rule for many centuries. It has, of course, now, in more recent decades and centuries, come back very much into fashion as an ideal, as the inspiration, as the starting point for our democratic journeys in so many countries today. Hi, Scott, how are you doing? Hi, Ivana, hola, kind of nice to see you. Thank you so much for joining. But there is a fundamental problem in the modern world with trying to institute any kind of modern Athenian-style direct democracy, and that's sheer numbers. Kind of in ancient Athens, at the height of the population, you were talking about 50,000 male citizens, voting adult male citizens. Probably in the Grand Assembly place, the Pnyx in Athens, you could probably fit 6,000 of them at a time. That looks pretty small in comparison to UK population. What are we now? 70 plus million. American population, population of many other countries. You simply couldn't do direct democracy and have everyone involved in every issue. It would be a physical impossibility. Although that said, in more recent years, and particularly in the invention of the internet, many people have advocated the idea that perhaps we could now start to have Athenian direct style democracy via internet voting, where everyone could be involved in these decisions. Hello, David. Hello, Amna. Great to see you. I'm so glad you enjoyed the documentary. David, kind of from New York. Great that you can join in. Wow, kind of fantastic to have you. So this idea of kind of, could we now, in an internet age, and using modern technology, bring back some aspects of that direct style democracy of ancient Athens? Well, we could do, but do we want to do that? Obviously, in Britain, the most recent example of everyone getting involved and voting on an issue was the Brexit referendum, which has, over the past couple of years, caused incredible division and problems kind of within the British political system, and continues very much to do so as we rapidly approach 29th of March 2019 and Leaving Day. From Siena, Giardina, ciao, come va? People kind of go, you can't simply, or at least kind of the way it's been argued more recently, you can't simply sort of suddenly go, right, everyone, we're going to do a democracy Athenian style and everyone get involved. What the Athenians understood, and what we need to understand equally, is that along with that right to have a vote and have a say in everything that's going on, we also have to take the responsibility to inform ourselves of the issues. And if we can't take that time to actually get involved in the issues fully enough, then we are going to have difficulties in making that kind of direct democratic vote work for us in any meaningful way. So thank you very much, Christopher, for that. That was a great question, a sort of sense of through the ages what the ancient different political systems have meant, and why we don't see, or despite the fact we use the word democracy across 100 and something nations across the world kind of claim to be a democracy, some in reality more so than others, and that none of those are approaching the ancient Greek direct democracy model for, in many ways, good reasons. So we had some great questions coming in. Thank you so much for your questions. Do keep them coming in through the Facebook page in advance of each Q&A, or of course you can put up your questions now live. Linda, bonjour, ça va? We can take them live now as well if you're happy to put those up. We've had a question about from Alexandra Sills here, which is a question about writing books, lectures and TV documentaries. How do you approach subjects that don't fit in with modern values? So slavery, her example, slavery, gladiators, infant exposure. Do you think it's important to be neutral in the language you use in order to remain objective, or is this not necessary? Does subjectivity prevent or dissuade us from understanding the past? Great question. We do have to deal with this issue, whether you were thinking about books, lectures, or documentaries, and it's also an issue depending on the age of the audience that you're intending to speak to, and kind of what is appropriate, what would be considered something that they can understand and get their heads around, that you are able to talk to them about, as well as kind of whether it's a subject that doesn't fit in with modern values. My approach on this is that we are studying the ancient world to understand what it was like, and thus to mark up the differences between now, our world today, and that world in the ancient times. But particularly with Greece and Rome, we're then doing a second job, which is to think about how that very sometimes different world has still continued to echo through the ages right down to our own and have an impact, and how it's had an impact, and on the basis of what kind of understanding of that ancient world has it had an impact. And quite often we end up needing to correct our impression of the ancient world, and it's that impression that's often had the impact on us, and recorrect that to the reality. And sometimes that means facing up to the fact that they had very different value systems, whether that be thinking about Athenian democracy and the fact that they didn't give any rights to women, and that the entire system was based on slave labor, or whether it's something a bigger, like you say, like infant exposure. How do we approach that kind of worldview in which that kind of behaviour is acceptable? And we can see lots of examples of that kind of thing within Greek religious practice. So the sacrificing of animals as part of worship of the gods, their beliefs about what you needed to do for the gods to keep them happy, the beliefs about what kind of gods they had. All of these things are in many ways antithetical to the ways that we operate and think today. But that is absolutely crucial, and I always emphasize this for the students, that it is part of their job to be able to study a different culture, a culture that they may fundamentally disagree with, but do it with empathy. To be able to both put themselves in the shoes of those people and understand something of their worldview, but then to be able to do it and separate their beliefs and their ideas from the ones that they're studying, so that you can have empathy with these other cultures, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to agree with them. And I think that kind of ability to engage with, but also keep your distance from something is an incredibly important part of what we need to teach children and future generations. I mean, it's interesting that the OECD, who run a program called PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment, that looks at assessment and school curricula across about 70 different countries for 15-year-olds and how well it's preparing them for the futures that they will occupy, this year in 2018 is adding a new criteria to their assessment alongside literacy, numeracy, etc. They're adding global competency. And what they mean by this is how well are people being prepared, how well are kids being prepared for their inevitably global futures in which they have to engage with cultures that they will find very different from their own, they may not agree with, but which they need to get on with in a constructive way and be able to have a more constructive cross-cultural dialogue than perhaps we've managed to do in the past. So that kind of ability to both empathetic and keep your distance at the same time, I think, is absolutely crucial. Ruth, I'm so glad, understanding history gives us empathy. Yeah, absolutely. Kind of, and video, well, thank you very much indeed. And that's what kind of, I think, one of the great things that history can teach us, that you're talking about the past, but most often you're talking about cultures, and those cultures are different or similar to our own, and really it doesn't matter how far back in the past they are. The exercise of comparing and contrasting ourselves with those cultures improves our ability to do so in our own lives as well. Graham, as a teacher yourself, you find this issue very difficult. Yeah, trying to explain to pupils who are 10 and above kind of what that distance is, and how to kind of put themselves in the mindset of those people, that they didn't think this was a load of rubbish, that they actually fundamentally believed and did these things and felt that it was okay to do so. I mean, one of the fundamental ones that always comes up in relation to the Roman world and the Carthaginian, the Phoenician world, is that idea of infant sacrifice, and these shadowy worlds of Carthaginians that are slammed often in some of the Roman sources for being these child murderers, and then putting the child cremated remains into a pot and putting it into a religious ceremony. Are they actually murdering the children, or are these children dying from natural causes? Even in the ancient world, there was this massive cultural disconnect here between the Romans and Carthaginians, as they were going, what are these people doing? And as, in the period of global history that we study I'm studying with my students at Warwick at the moment, as the Roman world suddenly realised there was a bigger and bigger ancient world out there, and as more interaction between those different cultures and communities took place, that was an ever-expanding problem of understanding how these different cultures did things and how could you get on with them. Hello, Sheila from Wales, and great that you could join us. Thank you so much. It's turning into quite a deep and meaningful Q&A this afternoon, but thank you so much for your fantastic questions. That was Alexandra Sills asking about how do you do and talk about subjects that don't fit in with modern values. I think it's incredibly important that we do so, but we have to do so with both empathy and with distance, and with a certain amount of good, solid skepticism and rigorous historical analysis. That would be my thought. We've had another question which kind of ties in a little bit with this, but it's thinking about how do we do that public dialogue about our subject and about the ancient world, and how do we kind of mediate what's new and what's exciting about what we're doing. And of course, many of you may be familiar, this ties in with the announcement of the discovery of a graffito, which lends credence to the idea that the Vesuvian eruption happened later than often traditionally thought, not in August, but actually in the autumn, in October. And we had a question from Katie Cole saying that she'd be really interested to hear our thoughts on the question of the revised dating. I mean, this is a complicated one, and if you're looking on Twitter at the moment, it's actually sparking quite a lot of disagreement, debate, and dissatisfaction. in that some people are suggesting that, well, frankly, this is not news, this is not new. There's actually been lots of indications that this date, hello from Bucharest, Carmen, great that you could join us. There's been lots of indication that the traditional date of August is a bit iffy or uncertain, and simply that uncertainty in the sources that we have so far has not really been voiced particularly vociferously or well. It hasn't been received kind of in the public sphere, so we've taken as certain a fact which actually frankly was never certain, and that there's been an increasing number of indications from pieces of evidence that we might need to look more towards a fall-autumn date in October, and this graffito kind of adds to this, although it's not conclusive because it doesn't have a year in it. It doesn't explicitly say it gives you a final date. But on the other hand, there's also been a debate about what kinds of things from arts and humanities subjects, and particularly history, can get into the news. And very often I'm constantly asked when we're putting together some kind of press release about whatever it might be, what's new? What have you discovered? What's different? What's kind of what's been kind of unearthed? And this is in part, this is a science model, right? Kind of, what have you discovered? What kind of new discovery have you made? It's a model that works for archaeology quite well, in that actually what one is often doing in archaeology is discovering new things and bringing them to bear. But it doesn't actually work very well for the study of history and of ancient history, because very often it's not about the uncovering of a new fact or a new thing. It's about a revisiting of an assembly of facts, an assembly of ideas, and looking at them in a new light with a different set of questions, and perhaps putting a new kind of emphasis on a particular thing as being particularly important. Hello Cheryl, nice to see you, thank you so much for coming in. And trying to get that kind of into the news and across those public engagement channels to the wider world is often fundamentally difficult. So I think this graffito has flagged up an important idea that we need to work very hard to try and convince people of other ways of making history newsworthy than simply it being about new things, new facts, new stuff that has come out of the ground. And also, I think in particular in relation to the graffito and with the Vesuvian eruption, whether it's August or October, in some ways, we're moving the date backwards and forwards a couple of months. It might not feel like it matters, but actually for specific areas of study, and this has been flagged on Twitter recently, just today, particularly in relation to the study of the bones that have survived from this kind of large mass mortuary event, actually, depending on when the people died, is very important, because it changes their diet, it changes kind of the sorts of diseases that you might sort of expect to find being promulgated around. So actually it kind of makes quite a lot of difference for the study of particular kinds of evidence within this particular example. So there's lots going on here around the graffito revelation, and it's just one of a huge number of things actually that has been in the news recently. I don't know whether you've been following. If we do very quickly our kind of classics in the news and what's going on around the world section. So we've had children's shoes, Roman children's shoes coming to light in Palmyra. We've had the London Mithraeum under the new Bloomberg building winning the British Archaeological Society's best public presentation of archaeology award. That's fantastic. We've had the Temple of Apollo, the sort of final inscribed evidence proving that there was definitively a Temple of Apollo on Bulgaria's St. Ivan Island, which is great. And also one of my favourites, which I think is absolutely fantastic, in the island archipelago of Forni in the eastern Aegean. There's been another amazing season of archaeology over the summer with the discovery now of a total of 58 shipwrecks just in this little specific area, dating back from Greek and Roman times all the way through to the 20th century. So it's I think it's the largest collection of shipwrecks in one place ever to be discovered in the Mediterranean. It's partly being run out of the British School at Rome, the excavator, the investigation. And what it's saying to you, is that it's very dangerous waters around the island archipelago of Forni, lots of shipwrecks, but also the ability to then engage with these shipwrecks over time and see the changing nature of trade around the Mediterranean is going to kind of release untold boundaries of information and ideas. So I'm kind of hugely looking forward to seeing more of that project. Hello, Sabine. Thank you kind of very much indeed. So glad you can join us. And in terms of what's on, well, close to my heart, the Lytham St Anne's Classical Association that I'm president of continues its fantastic run of public events. Tonight, if you can get there up to Lytham St Anne's in northwest UK, they've got Simon Elliott talking about Septimius Severus in Scotland, so make sure you can try and get there for that. And also anywhere in the world, if you are, you've got to try this. This is an online oracle. An online ancient oracle. So one of the things that oracles were a key part of the ancient world, and lots of people liked to engage with them, and there were lots of forms of them. So there was the famous one at Delphi, but you could throw dice, you could use bones, you could do you could read the entrails of animals, you could read the passages of birds. If someone sneezed out of the blue, you could take that as an oracular sign. But you could also play games with famous texts. So one kind of way of doing this in the past that was a renowned oracle, the Sortes Virgiliani, was to take Virgil's Aeneid, the text, and sort of ask your question and then sort of randomly kind of select a section of text, and that would be your answer. And you can now do that online, right? So if you go to Sortes Virgilianes, that's SORTESVIGILIANAE.com, you can put in your question and it will give you an answer selected from the text of Virgil's Aeneid. Kind of what an absolutely fantastic fun game to play. So do that, and do share some of your answers that you get from the Virgil Oracle online with us over the Facebook page in the next couple of days. It'd be fantastic to hear whether you felt the advice was good or not. So we've had some great stuff coming in, and thank you again so much for your questions. Darko from Singapore, how are you? Great that you could join us. Thank you very much indeed. It's great to see you here. I hope all is well with you. And Sabine from Salzburg, hello, nice to see you too. So we've got time probably for one more question. And here we go. We've got another one this is from Steve Laperouse, and this is asking about the Areopagus. So the Areopagus in Athens, the location now is a hilltop of slippery stones, but what was it at in classical times? Absolutely, the Areopagus. So those of you familiar who've had a chance to visit Athens will know the Areopagus is this sort of hill that people really today basically only sit on at sunset, because it's got a very nice sunset view looking out over Athens. It's pretty windy up there, but there's no actual kind of ancient buildings or anything to see, and you can sort of easily miss it on your way up to the Acropolis, or whether you're off to the other side of the Acropolis and off to the Pnyx, the voting place of the Athenian democracy, where the Areopagus actually has a much longer and in some ways more interesting history. The Areopagus is the oldest kind of, if you like, governmental centre in Athens. It is where the council of the Areopagus, which seems to have had a really important role to play in the constitution of Athens, really from when it comes into focus in the 7th century BC onwards, way before democracy became part of Athens' story. And the council of the Areopagus was made up of ex-archons, and the archon was the magistrate of the city. So the magistrate, once he'd done his job as magistrate, he was checked, and if he passed the check to make sure he hadn't abused his power in office, then he became a member of the council of the Areopagus for life. They dealt with all sorts of governmental issues, but then their power, as democracy's power increased, the power of the council of the Areopagus was decreased. So by the time you get to the laws of Solon, it's restricted a little bit in what it can deal with. It's also its membership is broadened slightly because Solon kind of increased the number of different classes of citizens who could become archon and thus could become a member of the council. And then in the middle of the 5th century, as part of the democracy under the reforms of a guy called Ephialtes, actually most of the powers of the council of the Areopagus were stripped away, and it was left just with the power to try murder charges, because it was a court of law. And if you go into Greek myth, of course, the great story of Orestes killing his mother Clytemnestra and then being pursued by the Furies, it becomes, in Aeschylus's version, it's resolved by a court case judged by the goddess Athena, that takes place on the Areopagus in Athens. So it's an incredibly important, long-lasting institution. It's sort of sidelined a little bit during the heyday of the democracy, but actually comes back to have more power by the 4th century BCE. And we have one of my favourite surviving laws from the ancient Greek world, which is a text, the Law Against Tyranny from 336 BC, which has a relief above it with personifications of democracy and demos, the people, with democracy crowning a seated demos figure. And the law states that if democracy is overthrown, because in 336 they were very worried it might be, if anyone goes up to the council of the Areopagus, then they shouldn't be there, right? The council shouldn't be meeting. If they try and do anything, kind of, then absolutely they're going to have broken the law and they will be punished. So there was always a sense that the council of the Areopagus was a place that was inherently anti-democratic, that it was somehow not to be trusted. But the Romans absolutely loved it. So when Greece fell under the power of the Romans, the council of the Areopagus was reinstituted as having a huge range of governmental responsibilities, and it was to the Areopagus Council that St. Paul was brought to give his address to the Athenians when he was there preaching in the city and trying to seek converts to Christianity. So the Areopagus has an incredibly long history, a history of kind of up and down in terms of its importance and popularity, but a survivor nonetheless. And despite the fact there are no buildings and things to see there today, it's definitely worth going to spend some time sitting there and just imagining the centuries of debate and deliberation that has taken place right there. We're going to have to leave it there. It's already 4:30. Thank you so much indeed for your questions. Greeting Akos from Hungary. I'm so glad you've had a chance. You've been on the slippery hill of the Areopagus. Great job, Joe. Great to see you. Thank you all so much for joining in. It's been a really great chance to talk with you this afternoon. We've discussed some pretty meaty issues. So I look forward to seeing you next week. If you can tune in next Thursday, 4 o'clock, 25th of October, I'll be there. Keep your questions coming in. We've got lots more we haven't got to today. I promise you we'll try and get to them as soon as we can. Have a very great rest of the week and see you again next week. Take care. Bye-bye.